The last human, Mark, was a symbol of hope for Earth's future. But that hope was crushed when he fell, alone, on a deserted world. Earth had already lost so much. Cities turned to ruins, vast landscapes abandoned, and humanity scattered across the stars. Mark was the last person to stand against the end, and when he died, it felt like the last spark of life in the world was snuffed out. Mark's death, however, was not the end. Far beneath the Earth's surface, hidden deep inside an underground network, an ancient mechanism quietly activated. It was something that no one remembered, something no one knew existed. The last human's fall triggered the awakening of a forgotten power, and it began sending out signals to the far corners of space, unseen by any eyes. These signals were not meant for anyone but for the Earth's secret army, an army that had been waiting, sleeping, hidden away for centuries. The world above remained unaware of the stirring below. Governments had fallen long ago, and the few survivors left had barely enough to keep themselves alive. They lived in the shadows of a once thriving civilization, scavenging the ruins for anything of value. The idea that Earth could still be saved was an impossible thought. No one had believed in it for years. But Mark's fall would soon change that. Days passed after Mark's death, and strange things began happening. Disappearances, strange lights in the sky, and odd signals from deep beneath the Earth's surface were ignored by the survivors. They were used to the strange occurrences by now, just another part of living in a world that was slowly decaying. What they didn't know was that these signs were a warning. Earth had something stirring beneath it, something that was never supposed to wake. High above Earth, in the distant corners of space, other species continued their lives, oblivious to what was happening below. Some were peaceful, others hostile, but all of them believed Earth was lost. Humanity, in their minds, was gone, destroyed, erased from the history of the galaxy. But they were wrong. Deep in the darkness, Earth's secret army began to rise. Hidden for centuries, it was a force built to protect Earth from threats far worse than what humanity could imagine. These soldiers had been created in a time of war, before Earth's fall, and they had never expected to fight again. But they were made to be ready. They were trained in ways that no one on Earth could ever understand, prepared for battles that never came, waiting for the day they would be needed most. And now that day had come. The army moved in silence, their actions swift, their motives unknown. They had no memory of their origins, no idea of the events that had led to Earth's destruction. They only knew one thing. The signal had been sent, and it was their time to act. The survivors above had no idea what was coming for them. No one could imagine that a force like this existed, waiting beneath their feet, hidden in the Earth's very core. The survivors didn't know how to react. Strange figures appeared from the shadows, silent and efficient. At first, they seemed like a new kind of enemy. But as they moved, it became clear that they weren't here to destroy. They weren't here to harm. They were here to protect. But protect who? And from what? The survivors couldn't answer these questions. All they knew was that this army was not of their making, and their existence was a mystery. As the army began to make itself known, there were whispers in the survivor camps. Was this a sign of salvation? Or was it just another part of Earth's long, drawn-out death? Some feared these warriors, thinking they might be another force of destruction, but others saw them as hope. They didn't know what the army wanted, but they knew one thing for sure. Humanity had no future unless they understood it. Meanwhile, the hidden soldiers moved with precision, preparing for something, though they themselves didn't fully understand it. The ancient mechanism that had activated with Mark's death was still sending out signals, gathering pieces of forgotten history, and pulling Earth's secret army into action. But what was the goal? What was this army meant to face? In the deep underground bunkers, the soldiers continued to train, waiting for something to happen, something to give them purpose. They had been awakened, but they didn't know why. They had no memories of Earth's fall, of the enemies they were supposed to fight, or even the technology they wielded. Their only purpose was to defend the planet, but they had no idea who would be their enemy or what the real threat was. The survivors began to realize that the world they knew was changing. The Earth they had once called home was no longer the same. Something was waking, and it was beyond their control. No one knew what would happen next, but the events unfolding around them made it clear that Mark's death was not the end. It was only the beginning. As the days passed, the tension grew. The survivors didn't know how to react to the army that was now walking among them. Were they a gift from the past, meant to save them, or were they a sign that Earth's story was far from over? As the signals from beneath Earth's surface continued, the survivors knew one thing for certain. The last human's fall had set something powerful in motion, and soon they would all learn exactly what that was. The survivors had only just begun to realize that something extraordinary was happening beneath their feet. Mark's death, though it seemed like the final chapter for humanity, had triggered something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. As the days passed, the underground stirrings continued. Strange energy pulses emanated from deep beneath Earth's surface, shaking the ground in subtle tremors. For the survivors, it was just another strange occurrence in a world filled with mystery. But for those who had been watching, something far more profound was at work. The survivors had learned to live in the shadows of a dying world, clinging to life in the remains of once great cities. Earth had become a shell of itself, ravaged by time and alien forces. With no centralized government, the survivors fought to stay alive in small, scattered groups. They were focused on basic survival: food, water, and shelter. Few of them dared to dream of anything beyond that. The idea that they could still have a future seemed foolish. But the truth was far from their minds. Beneath the surface, Earth's secret army was awakening. Deep in underground bunkers, hidden from the world above, soldiers were rising from their long slumber. They were a well-trained, highly specialized force, born from a time before Earth had fallen, crafted to protect the planet from threats beyond anyone's understanding. These soldiers, though they had been dormant for centuries, were ready now. Ready to fight, ready to defend. But against what? No one knew how long they had been sleeping. No one knew who had put them there or why. All the soldiers knew was that their purpose had been to protect Earth, and they would do so at any cost. The strange signals sent out when Mark died had triggered the ancient systems that were buried deep within Earth's core. These systems had only one function: to alert the secret army that Earth was in danger and that it was time to rise. At first, the soldiers weren't sure what was happening. The technology they relied on was outdated, long forgotten by the world above. Their memories had been erased, leaving them without knowledge of their origins or the enemies they were meant to fight. The only thing they remembered was their mission: to defend Earth, no matter what. As they began to regroup, they realized that they weren't alone. The survivors, too, were starting to notice them. At first, the survivors were terrified. They saw these figures emerging from underground bunkers, silent, powerful, and with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. They were soldiers, but they didn't look like any soldiers the survivors had ever seen. Their weapons were advanced, glowing with energy that seemed impossible in a world where technology had all but faded away. Their movements were precise, almost mechanical, as though they were part of something much larger than themselves. The survivors watched from a distance, unsure whether these new figures were a blessing or a curse. Some saw them as protectors, perhaps the very force that Earth had been waiting for. Others feared them, unsure of what they wanted or why they had arrived. What if they were another enemy, another force sent to finish what had already begun? The survivors couldn't be sure. The uncertainty filled the air, hanging heavy over the broken land. For the soldiers, there was no time for fear. They had one task: protect Earth. But they didn't know what that meant. They had been asleep for too long, and Earth had changed. What threats could possibly be waiting for them? They knew nothing of the current state of the world, nothing of the dangers that had come in the wake of humanity's fall. The only thing that mattered was that they had been awakened. Their duty was clear, but the enemy was not. As the soldiers began to emerge more frequently, the survivors grew more curious. Who were these beings? What was their purpose? It became clear that these were not ordinary people. They moved with purpose, their bodies enhanced by technology far beyond the survivors' understanding. They seemed like machines, but there was something deeply human in their eyes. They were not just soldiers, they were something else entirely, something that had been built for a time like this. There was a small group of survivors who decided to approach the soldiers. They wanted to know more. They wanted to understand what was happening. Led by a woman named Sarah, the group cautiously made their way toward the nearest bunker, where the soldiers had been spotted. As they got closer, they saw the soldiers standing in formation, silent and still. Sarah hesitated but knew that this might be their only chance to find out what the army wanted. One of the soldiers, a tall figure with a glowing, energy-based weapon at his side, noticed them first. Without a word, he stepped forward. His movement was fluid, calculated, as if he had done this 1,000 times. Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground. She had to know if these soldiers were their salvation or their doom. The soldier raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't attacking. He was waiting for them to speak. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening. Then Sarah took a deep breath and asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Who are you? And what do you want with us?" The soldier stared at her for a moment before speaking in a voice that was calm, yet filled with an authority that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "We are the defenders of Earth," he said, his voice almost mechanical, as if it had not been used in a long time. "We were created to protect this planet from threats far greater than anything humanity has ever known. And now, we are here." The survivors stood in shock. This was Earth's secret army. They had never known such a thing existed, but now they were faced with the reality of it. The soldiers didn't know the full extent of the threat that awaited them. But they knew one thing for sure. Earth was in danger, and they had been activated to fight back. As the first contact was made, Sarah realized something important. The soldiers weren't just there to protect. They were Earth's last line of defense. If they were awakened, then something was coming. Something far worse than anything the survivors could imagine. And the fight for Earth's survival was just beginning. As the soldiers stood in front of Sarah and her group, the air was thick with tension. The survivors had never seen anything like this before. The soldiers were unlike any human they had ever known. They were precise, almost mechanical in their movements, yet there was something undeniably human about their eyes, as though they were struggling to understand a world that had changed far beyond their control. "Who are you really?" Sarah asked again, her voice steady but filled with disbelief. "Why are you here? What is Earth's enemy?" The soldier who had spoken earlier didn't answer immediately. He stared at Sarah for a long time, his eyes scanning the survivors. He seemed to be processing her question, as though he wasn't entirely sure how to respond. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "We do not know everything," he began. "We were created long before Earth fell. Our mission is to protect the planet from threats that are beyond your understanding. But we were dormant, waiting for a signal to awaken us." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "A signal?" she asked, her mind racing. "From what?" The soldier's expression remained unreadable. "We were waiting for the fall of the last human. The signal was received when your kind ceased to be a threat." The words echoed in the air like a thunderclap. The fall of the last human. Mark's death had triggered their awakening. But what did that mean? Why had Mark's death, and by extension the end of humanity, been the trigger for their rise? Sarah's heart raced as the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. The soldiers had been waiting for something, but they didn't seem to understand the full picture. They didn't know who or what the real threat was. "But who is the enemy?" she asked urgently. "What is it that we're facing?" The soldier's eyes flickered for a moment, as if the question itself was too dangerous to answer. He hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "The enemy is not something you have ever faced. It is not of this world." His words were like a cold breeze, chilling Sarah to the core. An enemy not of this world. Her mind began to race. Could this be the same alien threat that had destroyed Earth? The same force that had driven humanity to the brink of extinction? The soldier continued, his voice steady, but filled with something like regret. "We do not know everything about them. What we do know is that they are a force from beyond your galaxy, and their arrival is inevitable. They have been coming for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment has arrived." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The survivors had barely survived the collapse of their own world. The idea of an enemy from beyond the stars coming to finish the job was almost too much to bear. "And what can we do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can we stop them?" The soldier's expression softened, though it remained stoic. "That is why we are here. We are Earth's last line of defense. We were designed to fight them, to stop them from destroying your world." "But why now?" Sarah asked. "Why were you waiting for Mark's death to activate?" The soldier remained silent for a moment, his eyes looking off into the distance. "We were waiting for the final signal, the fall of humanity's last hope. But we were also waiting for something else. The enemy does not just come to conquer, they come to consume, and Earth is the prize they seek." Sarah's blood ran cold at the thought. Consume. The word lingered in the air like a shadow, filling her with dread. What kind of enemy could consume an entire planet? The soldier seemed to sense her fear. "You do not yet understand, but you will. We are not just defenders. We are your only hope. Without us, Earth will fall, and your kind will be erased from history." Sarah nodded slowly, her mind reeling. The weight of the situation was almost too much to grasp. Earth's secret army, created long before humanity's fall, was their only hope for survival. But what did that mean for the future? Were they even strong enough to face this new threat? Could they stop an enemy that was capable of consuming entire worlds? She turned to the others, who were listening intently, their faces filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. They, too, had questions, but for now, they remained silent. They had to face whatever was coming, and the soldiers, the mysterious protectors of Earth, were the only ones who could help them. The soldier turned and began to walk toward a nearby structure. "You must come with us," he said over his shoulder. "There is much more you need to know. Time is running out." The survivors exchanged uncertain glances before following him. As they walked deeper into the underground complex, Sarah's thoughts raced. There were so many unanswered questions, but one thing was clear: they were running out of time. The enemy from beyond the stars was coming, and Earth's secret army was their last defense. But were they strong enough? And even if they were, would it be enough to save what was left of humanity? As they descended further into the darkness of the underground bunkers, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only just beginning. The hidden enemy that the soldiers spoke of was closer than they realized, and the fight for Earth's survival would soon be upon them. The question wasn't whether they could stop the enemy. It was whether they could survive the war that was about to consume them all. The underground complex felt cold, its steel walls echoing with the sound of footsteps as Sarah and the others followed the soldier deeper into the unknown. The air was thick with tension, and every step felt like they were walking toward a destiny that none of them could understand. The survivors had learned that their planet was under threat from an unimaginable enemy, but the truth of this enemy was still a mystery. All they knew was that Earth's hidden army, the soldiers who had been waiting in the shadows, was their last hope. The soldier led them to a vast room at the heart of the bunker. It was unlike anything the survivors had seen before. Walls lined with advanced technology, screens flashing with incomprehensible data, and machinery that hummed with a quiet power. In the center of the room, a large holographic display flickered to life, revealing a map of the galaxy. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the stars and planets. This wasn't just a map of Earth. It was a map of the entire galaxy, and beyond that, something darker. At the edge of the map, a distant cluster of stars blinked ominously, almost like a warning. The soldier stood beside the map, pointing at the blinking cluster. "This is where the enemy comes from," he said, his voice calm, but with a hint of urgency. "A far-off galaxy, one that has been slowly advancing toward Earth for centuries. They have been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment is now." Sarah squinted at the distant stars. "What are they?" she asked. "What do they want with Earth?" The soldier paused for a moment, then turned to her. "The enemy is known as the Zhaxal," he said, the name hanging in the air like a curse. "They are not like anything you've encountered. They are a race of alien beings who have existed for millennia. They travel from galaxy to galaxy, consuming entire worlds. Their hunger is endless." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Consume entire worlds," she repeated, her voice trembling. "Yes," the soldier replied. "The Zhaxal don't conquer worlds. They consume them. They extract everything of value from a planet, its resources, its life forms, its very essence. They leave nothing behind but a dead, lifeless husk." The room seemed to close in around Sarah as the reality of the situation hit her. It wasn't just an alien invasion they were facing. It was a predatory force, a force that would destroy everything in its path. And Earth was next on their list. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her mind struggling to comprehend the scope of the threat. "How do we stop them?" The soldier's eyes hardened. "You don't stop them with force alone," he said grimly. "The Zhaxal are powerful beyond measure. They have technology that far surpasses anything humanity has ever dreamed of. They use fear, manipulation, and destruction as their tools. But they are not invincible. They can be fought." "But how?" One of the other survivors, Jake, asked from behind Sarah. "How do we even begin to fight something like that?" The soldier turned toward him, his gaze unwavering. "That is where we come in," he said, his voice carrying a weight of resolve. "We were created not only to protect Earth, but to fight the Zhaxal. We are the only force capable of standing against them. Our technology, our training, and our purpose are all designed for this war. But we are still just humans," Sarah said, struggling to make sense of everything. "What makes you different? Why are you the ones who can fight them?" The soldier's eyes flickered with something almost like sadness. "We are not entirely human," he said quietly. "We were engineered to be more than what humanity was ever capable of becoming. We are the product of an ancient project, a last-ditch effort to save Earth from an unstoppable enemy. We are your only chance for survival." The words hung heavily in the air. Sarah tried to absorb the gravity of what the soldier was saying, but the more she heard, the more the weight of their situation pressed down on her. They were facing an alien race unlike anything humanity had encountered, an enemy that consumed worlds, that took everything. And the only defense they had was a group of soldiers, created long before Earth had fallen, who were now waking up to fight this war. But even with the soldiers' advanced technology and purpose, Sarah couldn't help but wonder. Could they really defeat the Zhaxal? Could they truly fight an enemy so powerful that it devoured entire planets? She wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. The fight for Earth had only just begun. The soldier continued. "The Zhaxal's first wave is already on its way. They are not far from our solar system. You have little time. The first step is to understand them, to learn their ways. If we are to have any chance at defeating them, we must know how they operate, what weaknesses they have. Our forces will begin preparing for the battle ahead, but we need your help. You must be ready to fight too." The survivors exchanged nervous glances. They had barely managed to survive the collapse of their world. Now, they were being asked to fight an enemy that seemed unstoppable. But what other choice did they have? Sarah's heart raced, but she nodded, determination flooding her. "We'll help," she said. "We'll fight with you, whatever it takes." The soldier's gaze softened for a moment. Good. We will need every person, every resource, every ounce of strength to stop them. The Zoxil will not give up. They will not stop until Earth is gone. But as long as we stand, there is hope. And with that, the survivors took the first steps toward a war that would determine the future of their world. The Zoxil were coming, and Earth's secret army was ready to fight back. But the question remained, would they be strong enough to stop an enemy that consumed entire worlds, or was Earth already doomed to fall into darkness? The battle for humanity's survival had begun, and the answers were still far from clear. The days following the revelation of the Zoxil threat passed in a blur of preparation and tension. The survivors, once scattered and struggling to adapt to a world that had crumbled, now found themselves training under the watchful eyes of the soldiers. These beings, engineered for a war none of them had ever imagined, were their last hope. The stakes were higher than they had ever thought possible, and every moment felt like a countdown to an inevitable clash. Sarah and the others had quickly learned that the soldiers weren't just military figures. They were experts, having studied the Zoxil for decades, maybe even centuries. Their knowledge was vast, and though it was clear they had been built for war, there was something deeply human about them. They understood fear, hope, and loss, even if they didn't always show it. They were humanity's legacy, designed to protect what was left of Earth from the most terrifying threat the galaxy had ever known. The survivors spent their days training in the harsh environment of the underground facility. There were weapons to be learned, strategies to be understood, and skills that needed to be mastered. Sarah had never held a weapon before, but under the guidance of the soldiers, she became proficient in hand-to-hand combat and advanced firearms. Jake, once a quiet mechanic, found himself behind the controls of machinery he had never thought possible. The survivors were learning quickly. They had no choice. The soldiers drilled them relentlessly, their methods cold and precise. They taught the survivors how to move as a unit, how to fight as one, even though they were all from different walks of life. But there was one constant. The shadow of the Zoxil loomed over everything. The soldiers' faces were grim as they explained that the enemy's arrival was imminent. "We have no time," the soldier leader, who Sarah had come to know as Captain Rowe, said one evening as they gathered for a briefing. "The first wave will arrive within days. Their ships are already approaching the outer edges of the solar system. We've detected them. There's no stopping it. The only thing left to do is prepare." The survivors gathered in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Sarah's mind raced as she thought about the Zoxil. These beings, whose sole purpose seemed to be the consumption of entire worlds, were coming for Earth, and there was no escape. They were unstoppable, and even with the soldiers' technology, Sarah knew the odds were stacked against them. "What are we waiting for?" Jake asked, his voice strained with impatience. "Why not attack them now? Why wait until they're here?" Captain Rowe looked at Jake, his face unreadable. "We must understand our enemy before we fight them. We cannot afford to rush into battle without knowledge. The Zoxil are not like anything you've faced before. They are more than just an alien force. They are an ancient predator that has been consuming worlds for millennia. We must be smart. We must outthink them." There was a long pause as the survivors digested his words. Sarah, however, couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. She knew Captain Rowe was right, but every minute that passed felt like a minute closer to the end. The Zoxil weren't just coming. They were already here, and they would not stop until they had taken everything. "I understand," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "So what's our next move?" "We move to the next phase," Captain Rowe replied, his tone resolute. "We take the fight to them. We will not wait for them to reach Earth. We will strike first." The room went still at his words. For the first time since they had begun training, the survivors saw a flicker of hope in the eyes of the soldiers. The idea of fighting back, of taking the war to the Zoxil before they could invade Earth, was a risky one. But it was their only chance. The soldiers had the knowledge, the training, and the weapons. The survivors had the heart, and together they would stand against the coming storm. Captain Rowe turned to the holographic map once again, his finger tracing a path across the galaxy. "We know where their ships are. Our plan is simple. We strike at the heart of their fleet before they can invade Earth. We attack now, while they are still vulnerable." Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline at the thought. A preemptive strike. The survivors and the soldiers would take the battle to the enemy before they even reached Earth. It was bold, dangerous, and it just might be their only chance to save the planet. "What do we need to do?" Sarah asked, her voice firm. "We need every fighter, every ship, every weapon at our disposal," Captain Rowe said. "We have a small fleet at our command, mostly remnants of Earth's military forces. It's not much, but it's enough to make a dent. We will hit their fleet hard, disrupt their command, and force them into retreat. If we succeed, we buy ourselves time. If we fail—" His voice trailed off, and for a moment, the weight of the situation was too much to bear. There was no time for failure. The survivors couldn't afford to lose this fight. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "The battle will be tough," Captain Rowe continued, his gaze sweeping over the group. "But this is our only shot. You've all trained for this. You know what's at stake. If we are to win, we must act together. We must fight with everything we have." Sarah nodded, feeling the surge of resolve. The Zhagzil had underestimated humanity before, and they would do it again. Earth's survival depended on them now. There was no turning back. "Let's get ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. And so, with no time to waste, the survivors and the soldiers prepared for the final battle. The calm before the storm was over. The Zhagzil were coming, and Earth's last chance for survival lay in their hands. Every moment mattered. Every decision counted. It was time to face the enemy, and Sarah knew that no matter what happened, they would fight until the very end. The tension was unbearable as the last preparations were made. Every soldier, every survivor, had a part to play, and there was no room for mistakes. In the dimly lit underground hangar, the survivors stood before the sleek, battle-ready ships that would carry them into the heart of enemy territory. These ships weren't the massive, cumbersome vessels of old. They were smaller, faster, and designed for hit-and-run tactics. Their mission was simple: strike fast, hit hard, and create chaos before the Zhagzil fleet could fully organize. If they did it right, they could delay the invasion long enough to make Earth's defenders ready. If they failed, humanity would face annihilation. Sarah stood with Jake, watching as soldiers double-checked their equipment. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Every glance toward the ships reminded her of how far they had come since the fall of the last human. From a world of scattered survivors to this. A chance at survival. But it was all riding on this mission. A single mistake could mean the end for everyone. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, his voice steady but filled with the same uncertainty Sarah felt. They had both trained for this, but nothing could prepare them for the horrors they might face. The Zhagzil were ruthless, and this strike would take them directly into the heart of the enemy's forces. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, her voice betraying none of the fear she felt inside. They had no choice but to succeed. There was no backup plan, no retreat option. Earth's future depended on them. Captain Rowe's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the tension. "Everyone in position," he said. "The first strike will be a fast hit on their outer fleet. We'll use surprise to gain an advantage. Don't waste time. Don't hesitate. Hit them hard and fast. Then pull back." The plan was risky, but it was their only hope. The Zhagzil had superior firepower, but they were not prepared for an attack from the survivors, especially with the help of Earth's secret army. The ships they had were agile, built to move quickly and hit with precision. The soldiers, though few in number, were trained to use every weapon available, every tactic that could surprise the enemy. They were ready to fight for the survival of their world. The engines of the ships roared to life, and the massive hangar doors began to open, revealing the dark, empty expanse of space. It was a chilling sight, darkness stretching out in every direction, broken only by the distant glow of stars. Sarah could feel her heart pounding as the ships rose into the void. This was it. They were leaving Earth's atmosphere, racing toward the unknown, toward the greatest battle humanity had ever faced. "We've got a long road ahead of us," Captain Rowe's voice came through the comms again. "Keep your heads on straight. We're going in hot. There will be no second chances." The fleet of ships accelerated, pushing toward the location of the Zhagzil fleet, using stealth technology to avoid detection. The survivors felt the ship's hull tremble as they pushed through the blackness of space. There was no turning back now. If they failed, humanity's last hope would vanish, just like the last human who had stood before the Zhagzil. But if they succeeded, even for just a short time, they could change the course of this war. The room went still at his words. For the first time since they had begun training, the survivors saw a flicker of hope in the eyes of the soldiers. The idea of fighting back, of taking the war to the Zhagzil before they could invade Earth, was a risky one. But it was their only chance. The soldiers had the knowledge, the training, and the weapons. The survivors had the heart, and together, they would stand against the coming storm. Captain Rowe turned to the holographic map once again, his finger tracing a path across the galaxy. "We know where their ships are. Our plan is simple. We strike at the heart of their fleet before they can invade Earth. We attack now, while they are still vulnerable." Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline at the thought. A preemptive strike. The survivors and the soldiers would take the battle to the enemy before they even reached Earth. It was bold, dangerous, and it just might be their only chance to save the planet. "What do we need to do?" Sarah asked, her voice firm. "We need every fighter, every ship, every weapon at our disposal," Captain Rowe said. "We have a small fleet at our command, mostly remnants of Earth's military forces. It's not much, but it's enough to make a dent. We will hit their fleet hard, disrupt their command, and force them into retreat. If we succeed, we buy ourselves time. If we fail..." His voice trailed off, and for a moment, the weight of the situation was too much to bear. There was no time for failure. The survivors couldn't afford to lose this fight. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "The battle will be tough," Captain Rowe continued, his gaze sweeping over the group. "But this is our only shot. You've all trained for this. You know what's at stake. If we are to win, we must act together. We must fight with everything we have." Sarah nodded, feeling a surge of resolve. The Zhagzil had underestimated humanity before, and they would do it again. Earth's survival depended on them now. There was no turning back. "Let's get ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. And so, with no time to waste, the survivors and the soldiers prepared for the final battle. The calm before the storm was over. The Zhagzil were coming, and Earth's last chance for survival lay in their hands. Every moment mattered. Every decision counted. It was time to face the enemy, and Sarah knew that no matter what happened, they would fight until the very end. The survivors had struck the first blow, but the Zhagzil were not so easily defeated. The battle was far from over, and with the loss of one of their ships, it was clear that humanity's path to victory would not be easy. The survivors had shown they could fight back, but now it was time for the final stand. Earth's secret army had been awakened, and they would need to be at their best to ensure humanity's survival. As the surviving ships regrouped in the darkness of space, the gravity of the situation settled in. The Zhagzil had learned from their initial surprise attack. They were adapting, rethinking their strategies, and adjusting their defenses, but the survivors were not going to back down. They had no choice but to push forward. There was no going home, no turning back. The survival of humanity depended on their next move. Captain Rowe's voice came through the comms, steady but filled with urgency. "This is it, everyone. We've given the Zhagzil a taste of what we can do. Now it's time to end this. We don't have the luxury of time. We've got one shot to break their forces wide open, and we need to do it now." Sarah felt the weight of his words. One shot. They had lost one ship already, and the Jagsul were only getting more prepared. Their strength was in their numbers, their technology, and their ability to adapt quickly. But the survivors had something the Jagsul didn't: Earth's secret army. A force built from the ashes of humanity's past, an army forged in desperation and secrecy. The survivors had studied the alien invaders for years. They knew their tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses. They had been training, preparing for a fight that many thought was impossible to win. But now, the time for training was over. The time for battle had arrived. In the command center, Sarah could feel the pulse of the ship's systems as she and the other pilots prepared for the final push. Her hands gripped the controls with determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself, for Earth, or even for her crew. She was fighting for the future of humanity. For a world that had been on the brink of extinction, but now had a chance to rise again. "Everyone, prepare for the final strike," Captain Rowe's voice commanded. "We're taking it straight to their heart." The fleet of ships, though smaller now, was still a force to be reckoned with. Every pilot knew their role. They had trained for this moment for years, and now they would make their move. The enemy might have been bigger, but the survivors had something the Jagsul could never understand: a burning will to survive. The survivors launched their ships toward the center of the Jagsul fleet. The space ahead of them was dark and filled with danger. There was no turning back now. Every movement counted. As Sarah's ship moved deeper into the heart of enemy territory, she could see the massive Jagsul warships looming ahead, their weapons charging, ready to fire. But the survivors had the element of surprise. The first wave of fire from the Jagsul ships came fast, but the survivors had been waiting for this. Their ships twisted and turned, narrowly dodging the beams of energy that came at them from all angles. The chaos of battle erupted once again. But this time, it was different. The survivors fought with a fury they had never shown before. Every shot was aimed with deadly precision, every movement calculated to ensure maximum damage. Sarah's ship swooped in low, firing at a Jagsul cruiser that was charging up its weapons. The blast hit its power core, sending a shockwave through space. The Jagsul ship exploded in a fiery burst of light, its debris scattering into the cold void. "Good shot." Jake's voice came through the comms. He was still with her, still fighting at her side. Sarah could feel a sense of pride surge in her chest, but there was no time to celebrate. The Jagsul were already regrouping, their larger ships forming a defensive line. "Don't let up," Captain Rowe commanded. "We need to break their formation. Keep hitting them hard. Keep moving." The survivors pressed on, their ships darting through the Jagsul fleet, striking where the enemy least expected it. But the Jagsul were relentless. They began counterattacking with all their might, throwing everything they had at the survivors. For every ship the survivors destroyed, it felt like the Jagsul brought two more into the fray. The battle had escalated to an unimaginable scale. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the Jagsul ships closing in. Their numbers were overwhelming. She could see the look of determination in her crew's eyes. They had come this far, and they wouldn't give up now. The survivors' ships continued to fire, cutting down enemy ships left and right, but it wasn't enough. The Jagsul were closing in. "Captain, we can't hold them off for much longer," one of the survivors said, his voice tight with fear. "We need a plan. Now." Captain Rowe didn't hesitate. "There's only one option left. We target their flagship. If we take it down, the rest will fall apart." Sarah's mind raced. The flagship. It was the heart of the Jagsul fleet, the command center, and the most heavily guarded vessel. It seemed impossible, but if they could destroy it, they might just have a chance. "We're doing it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. "We hit the flagship, no matter what." With a final, desperate push, the survivors launched themselves toward the Jagsul flagship. It was the last hope for humanity, the final stand. If they failed, Earth would fall. If they succeeded, they would have won the impossible fight. The future of humanity was in their hands.